All right, I got kicked off before. I don't know what happened. So, still wandering in, talking about science. I don't know if anybody wants to talk about science. It's not even ready here right now to talk about science, but it is what I am trying to do. I will answer lots of questions about the cardiovascular system if anybody has any questions about the cardiovascular system, or I could just ramble about the cardiovascular system. I was talking before about how much I liked the cardiovascular system, so it's one of those things. You can certainly type me something in the chat and I could talk about it, or you could just check it out. So I was talking about blood type before, but I think I'll talk about arteries and veins. So arteries are the ones that go away from the heart. So the big artery is the aorta at the top of your heart, and when your heart pumps, boom, it pushes the blood through the aorta and all the way out to your bodies. And the arteries have actual muscle in them. So when you look at them, they look really thick compared to the veins, which makes them kind of a lot of fun. The veins are really skinny. Veins are interesting because they do not actually pump blood anywhere. So then you got to say, how does the blood get back to the body? Well, I don't know. How does it get back to the body? It's got to do it somehow using something, right? And the answer is that if something's got to move it, muscle has to move blood through the veins. But the veins themselves don't really have a lot of muscle. So what happens? Well, when you walk, your muscles push blood through the veins, which is really interesting. It's also why if you stand in one place for too long or lay down or sit for too long, your blood doesn't move very much and it can clot, which is a problem on like airplanes and long trips and people on bed rest. So you want the blood to move through the veins. So you walk, you move your calves, they push the blood back to where it's supposed to go, and kaboom, you get blood going back to where it's supposed to go, which is super exciting. But then what would happen if it fell back down again? Well, it doesn't, because there's valves in the veins. So when the blood gets pushed up by the muscle, it gets stuck on the one-way valve and it keeps it going up and up and up. That, by the way, is how compression works, like compression sleeves. So I'm a runner, so I wear compression sleeves on my calves. And the idea is that it's just a little bit tighter. So first of all, it helps to push the blood up through the veins, but then also helps to hold it as it's going. So it increases circulation. My calf muscles are super annoying, even though I stretch them and roll them like every day. So I always have to do special things to make sure that they work properly. So calf sleeves. Some people wear full socks, like calf on, then all the way down to their socks to have a compression through their foot. But I wear toe shoes, so it's a little bit harder to wear compression socks when you wear toe shoes. So I only have sleeves. The only thing is you can't sleep in those, because if they cut off the circulation at the bottom of your ankles, your feet can swell up because the blood now doesn't push through your calves to get back up to the top, which is kind of interesting. So blood clots are definitely a major blood-related issue. They can happen for lots of reasons, and a lot of times it's because the blood just doesn't move very well, so especially through veins. So as I'm saying, it can form these little, like, if it just sits and it doesn't go anywhere, it can form clots. Now, little clots are not that big a deal because they're not really stuck somewhere and they don't necessarily block blood flow. And then what can happen is those little clots travel through the legs. They'll come up through the legs. They'll come up into the heart. And people are always like, oh, the heart is where it's going to be a problem, right? It's like, no, the heart valves are really, really big. Little clots can go through the heart, no problem. But then they go in through the right side of the heart. They go out to the lungs. Now this little tiny clot is moving into a little tiny capillary in the lungs. That's them. But what it does is it messes with oxygen, and oxygen is what you need for energy. So if the oxygen cannot get back to the blood, the lungs get all unhappy and all clogged up, and it becomes a problem. So that's blood clots. That's why you want to keep moving your legs and feet as much as possible. Don't stand in too many places. Don't sit for too long if you're on like a long plane ride or something like that. You want to move your calves and your legs and get up and move around. I am a huge fan of being in motion, and not just because I'm ADHD and I like to be in motion, but also because it's good for my muscles and I know it. See, that always annoyed me about like Disney World. You'd stand in line and you wouldn't move. And I'd be like, okay, my legs hurt, but I don't move. Can we do something about it? But it's hard to figure out. The other place that you can have problems with little clots can be in the arteries of the actual heart. So the heart is a muscle. Muscle needs energy. Energy comes from oxygen. So all that fits. So some of the blood doesn't actually leave the heart at all. As it's going up and out, it loops into the arteries and veins that go around the heart itself and feed the heart muscle. And those are really small. So since those are so tiny, it is a little bit easier for stuff to get stuck in them. When stuff gets stuck in them, they can clog up. Then your heart muscle doesn't get oxygen. Then it begins to die. And then you have a heart attack or clogged arteries. There's a couple of new and interesting things that I've read, hypotheses of how science works, that talks a little bit about those clogs, because we've wondered for many years sort of exactly what causes them. For a little while, people were linking heart disease issues to cholesterol, but those studies don't really make any sense in the sort of long term. So you have to look at it in a little bit of a different way. And so when you're doing that, so got distracted by another sound on my computer. I'm not used to this whole thing. Anyway, so those studies don't really make sense because it only worked in a couple of studies. They're large scale, do you remember what you ate kind of studies, and they don't factor in and out a lot of stuff. More studies have been done that suggest that actual like dietary cholesterol and even cholesterol levels in the blood don't necessarily mean your heart's gonna clog up. You need cholesterol for stuff. It literally builds your cell membranes and your hormones and a bunch of other stuff. So I think the most interesting podcast I listened to lately suggests that the problem isn't that there's stuff that could clog, because it wouldn't normally clog. It wouldn't normally stick to the sides. It would just slide on through the way it's supposed to. But if you have something in the blood that can cause it to catch on the wall of the arteries or put a little bit of a nick in there or damage it in some way, now you have something sticky, because the moment you have an open space in the arteries, boom, something pops in and tries to stick to it. Usually those are platelets, but the platelets grab other stuff. Platelets are real big on grabbing lots of things and holding them together to keep there from being holes and stuff, which is important. Gotta not have holes and stuff. And so if something sticks to it, then it can grab some of the extra stuff that's floating around, and then it causes problems. But if nothing causes damage to those arteries, then you're fine. All right, so then what causes damage to arteries? Well, there's a bunch of different things that can damage cells. Oxidative stress is one of them. So we talk about oxygen. So I was saying oxygen, it's important because it gives you energy. Here's the secret about oxygen, though. Oxygen was a toxic gas that almost killed a whole bunch of stuff on the planet when it first came out, because oxygen's actually pretty dangerous to cells. It's very reactive, and it produces lots of reactive compounds, and they go flying through cells and break things apart, which is real annoying. But we are able to use it by harnessing it in our mitochondria, who then do a pretty good job of keeping those things from getting in the way. So that's important. Keep stuff from getting in the way. So once it does that, once it keeps things from getting in the way, then it helps to fix stuff. On to somebody in my chat about lab stuff. All right, for everybody listening, I'm going to wander back into randomly talking about what I was talking about. Oxidative stress. Oxygen is a toxic gas. It destroys things. In fact, you're able to kill things with hydrogen peroxide because oxygen is a toxic gas. So hydrogen peroxide is H2O2. And when it hits blood and some other chemicals, it breaks apart into H2O and O2. And the O2 rips through any bacteria and things that are there, causing them damage. It also damages cells, which is why you don't want to just pour hydrogen peroxide on a wound, because you will damage your cells as well as the bacteria. But at least it'll be clean. So it depends on what you want to do. So since oxygen can rip through things, if your body has a lot of extra oxygen things floating around, oxygenated stress, it can damage the cells and blood vessels, which is super interesting. So that's one of the reasons that we're always talking about antioxidants, because oxygen rips through and kills stuff. Antioxidants are supposed to be things that pick up those little oxygen particles and wrap them up and get rid of them. Your body actually produces those, which is good. So it produces a bunch of them. Some of them can come from food substances, but really most of the food substances with antioxidants in them are going to get broken down in the digestive system. Most of those antioxidants don't really seem to make it to where it would be important, which would be the cells and the bloodstream and stuff like that. So lots of different things. But that's what they think really is the biggest issue, is oxidative stress, which can be caused by inflammation, poor diet, and lots of other stuff, which is why those things then lead to damage to heart vessels, to arteries. Once there's damage, the sticky things attach. Once the sticky things attach, they grab more sticky things, and then they create a great big clog and nothing can get through. And that is the inherent problem. So the goal is not to not have any of the squishy, sticky cholesterol stuff. You need that. Again, it builds your cells, it builds your hormones. But to avoid the damage to the artery walls to begin with. And that, of course, is where it gets complicated, because then it's like, well, what's causing the damage? What's the oxidative stress? Where's all that coming from? Interesting side note, this is why sickle cell anemia is so much trouble, because the sickle cells, so anemia is when the blood does not effectively carry oxygen. Either it's missing iron. In the case of sickle cell anemia, the blood cells are shaped wrong. There's problems with it. And you get very tired and fatigued. And tired and fatigued is not really like a dangerous problem, but sickled blood cells are, because they literally form the shape of a little sickle or like a crescent moon, and they have pointy ends. And the pointy ends can actually cause damage to and nick the artery walls, which is inherently a problem. And therefore, when that happens, that's when you have clogging up of the different kinds of arteries, and that's when you have heart problems. So sickle cell anemia eventually causes heart problems in people because the little sickled cells grab hold of stuff. And all of that is because of a one protein substitution mutation, which is always crazy. There are lots of like funky diseases that we don't understand. I find the ones that are just one protein different and they cause all these problems to be some of the most interesting ones that we do understand. Of course, they're also kind of sad, but you do what you got to do. So that is a bunch of information that relates to the heart and heart attacks and things like that. Some other related things with the cardiovascular system. Still getting over a cold here. Drink my mate. Trying to think of the stuff that I like to go over when I talk about it. Oh, I do like the process of blood clotting a lot. I need to post to my students my favorite little video of cells at work where the little platelets come in and they do the job. But the whole point of the blood clotting process, so it has 3 steps. So if you injure a blood vessel, which, let's be real, probably happens a lot, like a lot more than you want it to when you bump into things and stuff like that, you might injure blood vessels, usually just a little bit. Or maybe you're like me and you're constantly bumping into things and accidentally slicing bits in yourself and, stuff like that. I get like cuts and bruises all the time. I'm a complete mess. But the point is that if there's a break or a hole or a damaged part of the vessel wall, here's what it does. The first thing it does is it says, hey, there's blood going through here. This is a problem. And it squishes. So it causes the vessels around it to constrict, vasoconstriction, so that less blood is going through. So that's an important thing because it wants to slow down blood flow to that area. Then the little platelets come by and they see the damaged edges and they're like, oh no, this is a problem. And they grab hold. And they pretty much make a chain of themselves across the damaged edge. So the platelets will grab each other and grab each other and grab each other, which is cool because that is positive feedback, which is something that we've talked about, but not too much. And they'll grab each other right up until there's no more damage, which is important because if they kept grabbing each other, you'd have a clot. That's what you don't want. You want the damage to be covered by the platelets. Then, internal to the blood vessel, you then also have fibrin, which is a protein, lots of proteins. Protein's the most important thing. Everything's a protein. And it'll stick to the platelets and create essentially a net over the whole thing. So now the epithelial cells that live in the lining of the blood vessel can regrow, because that's what they do. They're going to regrow, but they take a little while. And they have a collection of platelets and fibers and proteins all stuck together, holding it up while they're regrowing, and that's your blood clot. Now, you'll see the blood clot, especially if it's an external one, a lot of times, even after it's slightly healed. But you have to be careful, because if you start to mess with it before it's healed, then you're just going to break it open again and force the platelets to reapply themselves to the position. So that's always too bad. Want to know anything else about science? I could do this all day. In fact, I do this all day. This is definitely 100% my job. Any questions about science? If my chat's doing what I want my chat to do. So this is fun. I'm still hanging out here. If anybody pops into my Zoom, I'm also randomly chatting on there, which I think is even more fun. So I'm listening for people to show up on Zoom as well. Like, for example, at least one of my students is still hanging out listening to me ramble. What should I ramble about? New topic. Let's see. More cardiovascular system stuff. Heartbeat. I like the heartbeat. It's another really interesting one. So your heart runs on electricity. Now, when we say electricity in the body, it's almost the same as electricity in your walls, but not quite. So electricity in your walls, when you think of batteries and wires and things, you've got little electrons that travel from place to place. When you have a charge move from one place to another, zap, it's energy and it moves from one place to another. In your heart, you also have charges that move from one place to another, but they move in between heart cells. So heart cells have little gap junctions, which are essentially little holes between the cells. And the ions can travel through. So if you remember, ions are charged particles, which are pretty neat. So for example, there's two sort of major ones in the heart. Potassium is an important one in the heart. That's K+, just like in the nerves. And calcium, Ca2+, is another important one in the heart. When people talk about calcium, they always think of bones, but you actually need calcium for muscles. You need it for nerves. You need it for lots of things. Also, you can get calcium from like spinach and stuff. You don't have to get it from dairy products if you don't like them. On the other hand, I prefer the dairy products to the spinach most of the time. So I will take all of my cheese. Thank you. So heart runs on electrical signals. The electrical signals run through the heart muscle and they tell it what to do. And so when the signal comes into the heart, it then tells those cells to squeeze or contract. Signal starts at the brain. Technically, the medulla oblongata, which is that bottom base part of the brain that does things all by itself without you trying, which is also important. And so that signal travels from the medulla to one little spot in your heart, which is the starting point, the SA node or the sinoatrial node. It is in the located on the right atrium of the heart. So right, it's technically on this side of me, but if you're watching this, I think it's on the other side. I have no idea, actually, what you'll see. So It goes into that part of the heart, and it sends a little electrical signal that tells the whole top part of the heart to squeeze. So that's both atria, because the atria are right next to each other, and it squeezes, and any blood that had come into those top parts drops down to the bottom parts. It goes through the valves, the bicuspid and the tricuspid valves. Then the signal travels from the atrium to the ventricles. And there's another little node that picks up the electrical signal, is the AV node. So the electricity travels to the AV node, and then it goes through all the little electrical fibers of the bottom part of the heart. Now, the bottom of the heart is much bigger than the top part, and then that part squeezes to push the blood up and out. And that part has to be a lot harder, because the top part is just pushing the blood and it falls down, but the bottom part is pushing it out. And the left side is especially extra thick and has to push extra hard, because it needs to get the blood to go all the way through the body and eventually all the way to like your toes and the top of your head. So that's pretty important. And that electrical signal is what makes the EKG. It's just why we can measure the electricity of the heart on a machine, which is real cool. And when you do that, you can actually kind of see it work, because the signal travels through the atria and it makes a little bump and the signal goes up. And there's a tiny little break, and then it travels through the ventricles and it makes a much bigger bump. And that's the heartbeat. Bump, 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 bump. And then you'll notice there's another break there, because the whole thing has to actually come back to normal. So just like with the neuron, the signal has to go up, then it has to come back down again. On the EKG, because it's an electrical signal, that's actually another bump. So there's a little bump for the atria, a great big bump for the ventricles, and then another little bump, which is where the signal is actually reversing. So the heart doesn't do anything during that last bump. The muscle is staying still, but the ions are going back to where they belong. So all of those have names. The first two parts are where something's moving. We call them systole or systole. I tend to say systole. And then this last part where nothing's moving is diastole or diastole. And the two systoles are broken down into which part of the heart is moving. So if it's the atria, squeeze, that's the atrial systole. Ventricles, ventricular systole. And then, while the heart takes a break, diastole. And then repeat to create an appropriate heartbeat, which is real cool. So that is how the heart signals and how the heart beats, which is a lot of fun. And how you can measure it on an EKG. And I think I've got a link to a video somewhere that describes, that shows all that stuff. When we have it set up in class, we actually have the ability to put like electrodes, do it on our arms, because I don't want to touch people too close to their bodies. You can actually follow the electrical signal and put it up on the screen and see it happen, which is a lot of fun. I should have brought that home so I could play with it. But all right. Now what? Talk about more science. Speaking of the cardiovascular system, a student once was studying sleep apnea, which was really interesting because that's a lack of air while you're sleeping. So what happens is part of the throat sits in a kind of a funny way in certain people, and it closes up. Looking to see if somebody's hanging out in my meeting or if Velisca just ditched me. Yeah. Nope. Now it's just me hanging out. And apparently just me on YouTube too. So talking to myself. I haven't mentioned that's a sign of genius. Talking to yourself. It's definitely a sign of genius. It's the only reasonable possibility. Sleep apnea. So part of the throat closes off in a certain way so that you don't properly take in oxygen while you're sleeping. Interestingly enough, it is not 100% the oxygen problem that causes the sleep apnea issues. I mean, it is. Oxygen's a problem. You need it. But When it closes off like that, when you're supposed to be breathing, it creates a negative pressure system associated with the lungs, because the lungs are real funky in the way that they take in and out air, and they're related to pressure. The negative pressure system is actually what affects the heart. Sleep apnea problems are almost always cardiovascular problems. People with cardiovascular issues sometimes have sleep apnea, and sleep apnea can be a major cause of high blood pressure and cardiac problems, because it puts the negative pressure on the heart, and now the heart has to figure out what it's doing, and it can throw off the electrical signaling process in the heart, and then the heart doesn't beat properly. Your body is a crazy, incredible working machine, and I don't even understand sometimes how we're able to stay functional, but it's amazing. I absolutely love how the human body works. That's why I like to know more about it and learn all the different bits and pieces, and how all my, stuff is working, and read thousands of articles on the subject. I've been doing that lately with the new stuff with COVID. So, by the way, if you want to know any of the sort of biology of that in semi-layman's terms, I've been doing my best to become maybe not an expert on it, but close enough so that I'm learning how it all works. You can ask me those questions too. That would be fun. So that's actually another one that relates to the cardiovascular disease and the inflammation, because the problems are in the lungs. It causes damage to the edges of the lungs, which causes the lungs to fill up with fluid, which means that they have pressure problems, because when there's fluid in them, they don't create the right kind of pressure to take in and out oxygen, so you can't breathe. There's not enough oxygen, so there's not enough energy. And all of that puts pressure on the heart in various ways. And if the heart is not in the best of shape, the heart will lose electricity, or not beat properly, or just be unable to sustain blood flow. And that's the inherent problem. So cardiovascular disease ends up being the bigger underlying issue that goes along with COVID than anything else, which is a problem in America, because we have a lot of undiagnosed cardiovascular disease and a lot of people who don't realize it's an issue. So I'm a little bit concerned about that, but not for me, because I keep my oxidative stress low by eating really low carb and avoiding things that produce oxidants in my body, and I run a lot. So I have a pretty good cardiovascular system, I think. And I run a lot at a low pace, so I do not overextend my heart and my heart rate. That's also really important. I don't want to push anything too hard. I want to keep everything at an easy to go pace. Back to me talking to myself. I think in the future I'm only going to do like half hours of these, because if I'm only talking to myself, I guess I even get bored of talking to myself. Anyway, so that was fun. Maybe I'll do it another time. Bye.